Hello and welcome to another Science Book Club, the gateway drug to the pursuit of knowledge. Joining me this week is Laura Skates, a PhD student in botany at the University of Western Australia. Laura, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, no worries. Happy to be here.
So Laura studies, what's the word? Carnivorous plants.
Yes.
So what do you study about carnivorous plants and what makes them so interesting?
So I'm basically studying their nutrition. So how much do they rely on prey versus the soil to get their nutrients?
So they get what, 50-50 or just a little bit from bugs?
It really depends. So some carnivorous plants will be really heavily reliant on prey, and others it's just a little additional boost. So
right.
Yeah.
So I know you've gone around Kings Park and shown people carnivorous plants. I've wandered around Kings Park. I haven't seen any Venus flytraps. So you've got different kinds of carnivorous plants there.
Yeah, so the Venus flytraps are just found in a really small part of America, but we have a sort of relation of the Venus flytraps here in Australia called Drosera or sundews. Yeah, and instead of like having a snap trap where they clap together, it's more of a sticky trap. So they've got sticky hairs all over their leaves.
And so the bugs absorb through the leaves, or do they drip down into the roots?
It's absorbed straight through the leaf surface.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so the leaf releases kind of digestive enzymes and it breaks down the bugs and then it can absorb the nutrients.
And so I know you've been to Germany to do spectroscopic analysis on the insects?
It's
What's that for?
natural abundance stable isotope measurements. So that's looking at, I guess, where on the scale these plants sit from being really carnivorous to not very carnivorous. And that's based on this theory where as you move up a food chain, the amount of the heavier isotope will increase. So
you need to measure the different types of atoms in the bugs, so you can say this plant is eating this amount of those bugs.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So you look at the sort of isotope ratio in the plants and in the bugs, and compare the carnivorous plants to non-carnivorous plants in the same environment, and you can sort of see where they all fit.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
So studying carnivorous plants, I was kind of hoping you would bring Day of the Triffids, but we haven't.
I did think about that, but I just recently read this book, so I thought it would be a good
The Botanist's Daughter. So
yes.
Both of us have brought books that are about collecting specimens to a degree.
Yes.
So The Botanist's Daughter, who's it by?
Kayte Nunn.
Okay. So what's it about?
So The Botanist's Daughter it's kind of two stories told in parallel. So one is kind of present day, set in Sydney, about this woman called Anna, who has inherited her grandmother's house, and as she's doing renovations, she finds this secret sort of hidden box behind a bookcase, and the box has a little notebook in it, and it's got a sketchbook of drawings of different plants and a little bag of seeds, and it's all very mysterious. She has no idea, who did this box belong to and why are these things in it, and why is it hidden in her grandmother's house. And then at the same time, you're also being told the story of Elizabeth in the 1800s. She's based in Cornwall. Her father is a botanist, and he's a plant hunter. So at that time, collecting plant specimens was a huge business. And he often goes to Chile to do his collections, but when he passes away, he entrusts her with a kind of mission to get a certain plant from Chile, the devil's trumpet.
So she's got a goal to go and get. Yeah. So otherwise it's a very naturalist thing. She's going around having just looking at the landscape, learning about the landscape.
Yeah. So she goes to Chile and she goes to sketch. So she's an illustrator, so she goes to sketch all of the plants and with the added goal in mind of finding this plant, which the reason for it is because it's quite a deadly plant on one hand, but if you prepare it in the right way, it can also be a medicinal plant. And
what does it cure?
I think it was all sorts of different things, but one of them was like Alzheimer's. It was had a kind of, maybe not curing it, but helping.
So that's going to sort of lead on to my next question, which is a bit of a stupid question. Is this a real plant?
That's actually a good question. It's I should have probably looked that up, but I didn't. But it is based on a real group of plants, the trumpet flowers. I did actually look this up before, but now I've forgotten exactly which ones. But there's a few different types of trumpet flowers. So, but it's sort of, I don't know whether this exact species she was looking for is real or not. And I don't want to spoil what happens in the book. But
we don't. You can if you want. We don't worry about spoilers.
Oh,
here.
really?
Spoiler
okay.
alert! But we can spoil them here.
Okay.
So you said so it's modern day Sydney and then 1800s Britain and Chile.
Yes. Yeah.
So does it swap back and forth between the two, and they follow a similar path, or?
Kind of, yeah. So there are a lot of parallels between Anna and Elizabeth, and you can see that they're kind of quite similar people, like similar souls, I guess. And they're both very adventurous, but I guess, you know, Elizabeth is in a time when, you know, it was not the done thing that a woman could, you know, go out into the world on her own. So going off on these expeditions was quite a crazy thing in some people's mind. And I actually, there's a bit at the end of the book, the acknowledgements, I think, where the author actually talks about what inspired her to write this story. And part of the inspiration for Elizabeth came from Marion North, who, have you heard of her?
No, well, I'm not sure if the name rings a bell.
Yeah, so, well, she was a botanical illustrator in around the 1800s. And there's a whole gallery of her artworks in Kew Gardens, with just like all of the walls are just covered in paintings that she's done. And she was kind of an explorer of that time as well, going to all these far off lands to paint plants in their natural habitats. And some of the plants she painted were carnivorous plants. So I really love her work.
So I was going to say, as a botanist, what really gets you into this book? Why is that the book you decided to recommend today?
There's so many things. I mean, for one thing, the cover is just beautiful. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but I do often think, oh, that's a beautiful book.
Well, that's sort of why books have covers.
Yeah, exactly.
So you do judge them by their cover.
Yes.
That's why so much effort is put into the
cover design. Yeah, and it is gorgeous. I suppose as well, just having the word botanist in the title drew me to it. I feel like you often don't see botanists in, fictional stories. I mean, except maybe The Martian had a bit of botany in there, which was great.
How was that? Just the hero of the story, I'm a botanist.
Oh yeah, I was very happy about that. So yeah.
Because he had the other side. I'm also a mechanical engineer, and I'm like, whatever you need to survive on Mars.
See, my brother is a mechanical engineer, so we've sort of had, arguments like, no, he's a botanist. But yeah, so those drew me in at first. But I mean, there's so many things that I really loved about this story. And there were particular things that drew me in because I had a personal connection to some of the places in the book. So Anna, for example, ends up going to Kew Gardens. And if you've ever been to Kew Gardens?
I haven't been to Kew Gardens. I want to.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
It is amazing. It's a really beautiful place. And it's huge. There's so many gardens and glasshouses and lots of little spots to see. So I've visited there, I think, twice now, and I love it so much. So, and seeing, Marion North and her gallery talked about, was quite cool.
So I know one of your PhD supervisors got to meet both David Attenborough and Bill Bailey at Kew Gardens.
Right, yes.
Was that the trip you were on?
Yes, so one of those trips, at least. So David Attenborough was at Kew Gardens in 2016 for the International Carnivorous Plant Society conference. So that society meets every 2 years, and 2 years ago it was at Kew Gardens. And so David Attenborough is actually the patron of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Carnivorous Plant Specialist Group. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically a group that works to help conserve carnivorous plants in their natural habitats, and to part of the reason for that conference, or part of one of the workshops at that conference, was for these researchers to assess where carnivorous plants are at currently, because a lot of them didn't have a conservation status sort of ranking until they were able to get together and
And carnivorous plants are quite important in Australia because we've got low quality soil. And...
Yeah, so here, especially in Western Australia, where we are right now, our soils are really, really geologically old. They're ancient. They've been weathered, and so much that all of the nutrients, or most of the nutrients, have sort of leached away. So we have a lot of plants here that have really interesting adaptations to get nutrients in a different way, and being carnivorous is one adaptation for that. And we actually have in WA the world's greatest diversity of carnivorous plants in terms of there's about 800 species worldwide currently recognised, and in WA we've got maybe a quarter or a third of those. So
come to Australia, even the plants are trying to eat you.
That's right, yes.
It just seems odd to me as a West Australian born and raised. I don't wander through the garden or the bushland and recognise that a plant is eating bugs. And they're doing it sneakily. They're just sticking to them and being absorbed through the leaf. That's
right. Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes it's not something you notice straight away. But if you are walking through the bush, you can look out for the sundews because they have the sticky dewdrops and they kind of glisten in the sunshine, hence their common name, sundew. And they're really beautiful. I mean, when you look closer, you do see they're bugs and it's a bit gross. Yeah. Right. But there are other types of carnivorous plants here as well that, we have so many. So there's the sundews, that's probably the biggest group, the most species-rich group that we have in WA. In comparison, Europe has maybe 3 species of Drosera. Here in Western Australia, we've got around 200 species of Drosera.
Wow.
Yeah, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. So you've got some that are like pygmy Drosera, the size of a $2 coin. You've got some that are flat on the ground, like that big. And then you've got some that stand up straight, some that climb up to 1 metre tall. So yeah, there's lots of different types to keep an eye out for.
I know I've detracted from the book here.
Yeah, sorry.
I've taken it away from the book here, but how big do carnivorous plants get? I mean, I'm assuming this tree isn't going to eat insects and get that big. So do they get to sort of 1 metre tall or whatever, and then they can't get enough nutrients from insects?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's funny that you mentioned the tree because there's actually this kind of 1800s story that was brought back to England. Explorers went off and brought back this story of this man-eating tree. There's this drawing of one that has serpent branches, and they called it an atrocious cannibal tree. Oh, wow. But we've never found that.
That
in
sounds
real life.
cool.
It does sound cool.
And let's face it, they would put one in Kew Gardens.
They would, yes. It would be a great attraction.
Oh my god, yes, that would be amazing.
But yeah, as far as how big they get, in Western Australia, I think the biggest, or some of the biggest ones we get would be Drosera gigantea, which is maybe up to that high, like a shrub sort of size, but it's very spindly, long stem, long kind of branching stems out of it. But there are, I guess, the biggest carnivorous plant in the world, might be wrong, but I think it would be one of the Nepenthes, which is the pitcher plants. Right. They kind of look like a jug, like a pitcher of water. Yeah, and
love those.
Yeah, they're amazing. They're beautiful, and there are some that are as big as your head, basically. So, yeah.
Eat whole rats. That's what I've read on the internet.
Yeah, well, so it's funny you say that. So there's one Nepenthes. I think that there have been. Some people have said that they've found rats and things in there, but there's a Nepenthes which has a symbiotic relationship with a tree shrew, which kind of looks like a rat, where the tree shrew sits on top of the pitcher and it drinks nectar from the back of the pitcher's lid, and at the same time it uses the bowl of the pitcher as a toilet, and that feeds the plant. So... It's win-win.
Nature is so beautiful.
It is.
And I'm sorry for taking us back to the plants from the book. We're meant to be here talking about books. Sounds fascinating. Yes. So it's a compelling story, not just for botanists.
I think so, yeah.
And so compelling you don't want to ruin the end for the audience.
I think so. I found it quite gripping. And, because you've got these two stories being told in parallel, and you can tell that there's a way that they link together, but it's not really obvious how they link together. So I think it's, I wouldn't want to spoil the ending, but I would definitely recommend reading this book.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it's not a Day of the Triffids ending.
No. There is a mention at some point of carnivorous plants, and I was going to try and find where it was before I came here, but I didn't get a chance. But look out for the mention of carnivorous plants. Yeah.
So we've gone from seed collecting to another naturalist, but animal collecting. So Gerald Durrell was a naturalist, like David Attenborough. So I have not read this book recently. This is one from my childhood. So this book was published in the 1956. Was this book?
Yep.
Yep. 1950. Ooh. Yeah, 1950. Looked like a 3. No, okay, it was 1956. Mm-hmm. So around the age of 6, I started getting into David Attenborough.
Right.
And so Mum basically read these books to me. So at 6 years old, I was old enough that, I was reading books, but Mum still would occasionally read books to me.
Yeah.
And it was a bit hard going for a 6-year-old.
Yeah, it's quite small writing.
Mum read these books to me. So Gerald Durrell, in some ways, had a life very like David Attenborough's. He'd tour the world, he'd see fascinating places, interesting plants, interesting animals.
Yeah.
And he eventually created a zoo. He had his own zoo in the Channel Islands off the coast of England. Mm-hmm. This book is semi-autobiographical. It's from his childhood, so 5 years he spent in Corfu, off Greece.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this illustrates his introduction. He was already interested in nature, but this illustrates his introduction to being a naturalist, to zoology, and how he came to be a naturalist later on in life and tour the world and start a zoo. So it's largely autobiographical, but he makes changes. So, like, his older brother wasn't actually living with the family. His older brother was still in Greece, but not living with the family.
Okay.
He makes a few other changes. Like, in real life, they had to leave Greece because of the start of World War II.
Right.
In this, they leave because he needs to go back to England and get an education.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the changes he's made are just to make the story that bit more interesting. It's a very, very funny book.
Right.
Because my family and other animals.
Yeah.
So
it's a funny title.
He's describing the plants and the animals, mostly the animals, he's discovering and collecting during his time as a boy in Greece, and the weird interactions he has with them. So, I mean, animals that you collect, pets, animals you collect that you stick in the zoo, they become part of the family. They have their own quirks and personalities, and he describes the quirks and personalities and the interactions he has with these animals. And it's very similar to how he describes his interactions with his family and the people he meets on Greece, in Corfu, the weird people he meets. So one of the first people he meets is a mute who sells him a tortoise.
Oh, okay.
So he's a young boy, goes out to explore his new home, meets a mute who sells him a tortoise.
Yeah.
And that just starts things. There's a guy who sells insects, and he has the insects tied to a hat. So they're these insects buzzing around his head, tied to his hat with thin cord.
Right.
And if you want to buy a pretty shiny beetle, you want that one, you pay him, and he pulls it down and sells you a beetle on a string.
Right. Are they alive or dead?
They're alive.
Oh, wow.
They're alive.
Okay.
They're buzzing around. And so he collects animals. So he has a dog. He collects a tortoise, butterflies, other insects, various other animals. There's some birds involved, I seem to remember. The problem is, it's so many years ago, I do get it confused with other books like Menagerie Manor, which is later on when he had the zoo.
Right.
So Gerald Durrell wrote a lot of semi-autobiographical stuff about his life, all very, very funny. So it's a very funny book. Oh, so it says, on the back, it says you've got a Quasimodo the pigeon.
Quasimodo the pigeon.
Geckos, ladybirds, glowworms, octopuses, and magpies. I don't remember what that is. It's been too long since I read this book, but I do remember it being very, very funny.
Right.
And now that I've got it out again, I need to go back and read it, because as a 6-year-old, there's a lot I didn't understand.
Right.
And I'm sure I will enjoy it even more if I read through it again now.
Yeah.
But it was inspiring as a kid because I was already interested in David Attenborough. Mm-hmm. This was the same sort of thing, and it was a kid doing this, and he was collecting all these animals, and I wanted to have a menagerie at home. I wanted to go and collect animals. I wanted a tortoise and birds and a lion and whatever else I could get my hands on. In the end, I had a cat and caught a few butterflies in the garden.
Close enough.
Near enough. I was living the dream. Close enough. Mm-hmm. Would have been nice to have a few more animals, but I think we ended up in 2 cats in the end. That was I had some fish at some point.
Yeah.
I had a bit of.
There you go.
Had a bit of a menagerie going.
Yeah.
I at that age I wanted to be David Attenborough, and for most of my school life I wanted to be David Attenborough. Yeah. And this was part of that dream, and a sort of path to that dream. As a kid, just be interested in the world, be interested in nature, start collecting animals, playing with animals, experiencing the world around you. And also he had interesting teachers. So this is sort of, I don't know, not upper class British, but this is 1930s British expat living in Greece. Mm-hmm. So he didn't go to school, he had tutors.
Right.
And I seem to remember some of the tutors were just hopeless and very mean, and he didn't taught him French and other useless stuff he didn't want to know.
Yeah.
But he had one tutor who, after that tutor realised how interested the boy was in nature, he started putting a lot of zoology into the lessons.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And so he had a teacher for a long time who supported his interest.
It's so important to have people in your life that will encourage those interests and bring that out.
And so, at the time, as a kid being read this book, I was just fascinated by his interactions with the animals, that he was collecting these animals. But looking back on this years later, and sort of thinking about it a bit more now, because I pulled it out as a comparison to The Botanist's Daughter, it was... it's sort of a growing up story in that the family comes out from bleak, dreary England where they don't have a lot of room to move. And as a family they grow, and his interest in being a naturalist and being a zoologist grows. He grows as a person, and Greece, Corfu, gives him the freedom to develop his hobbies, to build up this menagerie in his house. And experience the world, and experience different people. So not the grey, sullen British, but the weird people selling him a tortoise on the street corner in Greece. And to that extent, it's also a very... I haven't thought of the words. It takes a look at humanity. And is saying, we can all be ourselves. We need the freedom to grow, to just pursue our hobbies, be ourselves, be weird and eccentric. This is full of weird and eccentric characters, and they're harmless and they're friendly, and you learn a lot from them. And we need those freedoms to be ourselves, pursue our hobbies, pursue our interests, and be a family.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a great lesson to be learning.
It was. I really need to reread these books. So this one, Menagerie Manor. There's another one I remember, Rosie is My Relative, which is about an elephant called Rosie.
Oh, cool.
I don't remember too much about that one, other than there is an elephant called Rosie.
Right.
But these were a strong part of my childhood that encouraged me to be interested in nature, be interested in biology. Through most of school, I wanted to be a biologist.
Right. And
then in late high school, physics took my interest.
Okay.
And so I decided, I'm more interested in physics, and I want to, instead of being David Attenborough, I want to be the David Attenborough of physics.
Right, that's cool.
Brian Cox didn't exist at the time. Brian Cox was invented a year or two after that, so...
Yeah, that's a
Brian!
shame. Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I always used to not necessarily want to be David Attenborough, but at least, be his sidekick, maybe, be there to help out or, hang out with him and, do whatever he needed. But
I am so jealous of you and your supervisor who've got to meet David Attenborough. I've been to Perth Concert Hall to see him twice.
Right. Oh, me too. Yeah.
Watched
amazing.
it once. It's the same show again, but I wanted to see it again when he came again.
It's just so good.
It's amazing. It's
brilliant, man. And actually, what you were saying about Gerald Durrell kind of reminded me of, like I was reading, there's a biography, Life on Air, about David Attenborough, and I haven't read all of it yet, but the part about Zoo Quest reminded me a bit of this.
Not this book, but a lot of his later books, because his later books are about going and getting particular animals he wanted for his zoo, and so going and collecting them. Yeah. And it is very, very similar to Zoo Quest.
Right.
In sort of my mind, at least, it's very, very similar to Zoo Quest, except funnier. I mean, David Attenborough's got enough amusing quirks about having his teeth picked over by gorillas and things like that, and having bats fly into his hair. But this is also about the people that he meets along the way, and both the animals and the people are very, very funny, and it's a very, very funny book. All of his books are very, very funny.
Yeah.
So that's 2 books about nature and experiencing the world and collecting and growing as a person.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
Laura, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
We'll see you around.